Argentina quickly followed the UK as the second country to authorize the AstraZeneca vaccine. The vaccine has some competitive advantages that could make a big difference to the global economy. The company is set to produce up to 3 billion doses next year, more than Pfizer and Moderna combined, at a much lower price. That's really key. Earlier on CNN, one of the scientists behind this vaccine said it's the best option for low and middle-income nations.
This vaccine doesn't require the ultra-low storage temperatures. It's much easier to store and distribute. It's much easier to arrange vaccinations in smaller quantities when that's an appropriate thing to do, and is going to be available in very large amounts at a low price. And it's a vaccine that we want to be made available across the world. And the first stage of that is getting emergency use licensure in the first country, which we now have today.
Dr. Krishna Udayakumar is the director of the Global Health Innovation Center at Duke University. He runs the Launch and Scale Speedometer project, tracking global progress on COVID-19 vaccinations. So now that we have 2 countries that have approved the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine, how does that really change the game and change the fortunes for middle and low-income countries across the world that have been really in dire straits because of the coronavirus pandemic?
Yeah, we really have been watching developments of this AstraZeneca-Oxford vaccine because the world is really betting on it to work. And it's great news that we have from the UK and Argentina so far. Of course, we need to actually see the data to ensure that we have transparency behind what's actually happening. But this, I think, unlocks both in terms of the volume that's available, but also the ability to distribute with lower infrastructure in place. So for all of those reasons, I think this really gives us hope that low and middle income countries can get access to COVID-19 vaccines sooner rather than later.
In terms of the clinical trials, though, I mean, you talked about transparency. In terms of the clinical trials, the results in terms of the effectiveness of the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine were initially quite hazy. At first, it was said to be 60% effective, and then with a lower dosage that they discovered by accident, by the way, it proved to be more effective. So just based on all that, how confident is the company, and are we overall, as a society, that this vaccine, in terms of its effectiveness, can actually live up to Pfizer's?
It's a good question, and I don't know at this point that we haven't actually seen the data. When we saw the US FDA review of the Pfizer-BioNTech as well as the Moderna vaccines, we saw an enormous amount of data transparency and independent analysis there. We have not seen that yet from the UK regulatory body with the AstraZeneca-Oxford vaccine. Hopefully we will very soon. And as long as it hits a threshold of effectiveness that many regulators have said is around 50%, then I think it really gives us the ability to move forward. And when we think about which vaccine might be better in a specific situation, we have to look at more than just that efficacy number. So if the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine is able to make it to the last mile in low resource settings much more effectively, that may make it more appropriate to use than the Pfizer vaccine that requires ultra cold storage, for example, even if the efficacy numbers aren't exactly the same.
Right, but despite the fact that it doesn't necessarily require ultra cold storage like Pfizer, as you mentioned, what are still some of the challenges of producing and distributing a vaccine on this mass scale? They're talking about producing and distributing about 3 billion doses next year. That is no small feat. That is a very, very tall order indeed.
Yeah, we have to recognize first the incredible science that's gone into getting us multiple effective vaccines, but also recognize that what's pretty daunting is that going from vaccines in vials to vaccinations in arms is perhaps the even harder challenge, and that's what's ahead of us. We've seen the challenge even in the US in a high resource setting, and in low and middle income countries, it's going to be that much harder to make sure not just that the vaccines are available, but that we have a workforce that's trained and available, that we have supply chains that are powerful enough to get all of the vaccines and the supplies out to the last mile. We also have to have the data systems in place to be able to track who's gotten the first dose and when they get a second dose of this vaccine. And at the end of the day, we also have to make sure that we're addressing concerns around vaccine hesitancy, because the real shame would be if we did all of the work to get the vaccines out and people didn't have enough confidence to take it.
And that's why transparency is so important. But speaking of dosage, obviously the UK has decided that the best thing for them to do right now, just given the situation there in terms of the second strain in the country on lockdown, is to basically give people one dose, give as many people as you possibly can just one dose of the vaccine, and then perhaps a month later give them the second dose. That is the priority, as opposed to vaccinating or giving people back-to-back doses in just a few weeks. Is that the same model that the AstraZeneca vaccine should follow when it comes to distributing this to lower-income countries as well?
It's a great question and very hard to answer without seeing the data. That the UK regulator must have some confidence that one dose would be enough, or at least the public health authorities in the UK, to generate reasonable immunity. We have had some of those discussions similarly about the Pfizer as well as the Moderna vaccines, about whether the public health approach should be to try to get the first immunization out to as many people as possible. We've, of course, in the U.S. reserved a second dose for everyone that's getting the first dose now. In low and middle income countries, I think we'd have to follow what the actual clinical trial was, which is 2 doses, until we have better data on what one dose may actually produce in terms of immunity for an extended period of time. There are other vaccines, like one being developed by Johnson & Johnson, that are testing a single dose. And so we hope to have some preliminary data from that trial by the end of January. So in the next 2 months, we could have even one more vaccine that's available, and that one being a single dose, which again could be a game changer for the world.
Dr. Krishna Udayakumar, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.